welcome along to Point Blank Music School here in London. My name's Luke Hopper, member of the Point Blank team, and I'm joined here in the studio once again by our head of the school, JC.
Hello.
For this week's edition of Friday Forum Live. So for those of you guys that don't know, that haven't tuned in before, Friday Forum Live is your chance to find out a little bit more about what we do here at Point Blank, to ask any questions that you have and to generally get involved. We will be jumping into Logic with JC. If you do have any kind of specific questions, this week is definitely the chance to go for it, really. Pretty much an open floor.
Very much open. It's a Q&A, so waiting for some questions and hopefully I'll be able to answer them, address them.
So yeah, I mean, if you guys have any kind of specific questions about mixing, mastering, about Logic, production in general, you know, just post in the chat room and we'll go through them live. Also, before we get into that, it is worth you guys taking a look at the blog and about what's going on here at Point Blank at the moment. Last week we did have a masterclass with Shadow Child from Dirty Bird Records, which it was a really good session.
Good one,
yeah, wicked session. Looking at using a combination of Logic, Reason, a little bit of Ableton as well. Got to see a couple of his tracks. One which is kind of unreleased that he was working on, you know, at the time. So a really good insight into a professional producer and how they work. Quite a few good tips as well. Also next week we have a masterclass with Kate Simcoe, who's an amazing producer. You can find out a little bit more about that on the blog. That one's on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. And she's got some quite interesting work to do here, really. I think she's going to look at using Logic when she kind of works on remixes. Also her live set in Ableton Live. And I think she might also be opening up Logic for film scoring that she does. So I think she does a lot of work for TV and film, yeah.
Cool.
Really cool session. I think she's going to bring along a bit of hardware as well, so you might get to see her on the 106 as well.
Excellent.
Which will be wicked. Also, it's definitely worth having a look. Those of you who are regulars tuning into Point Blank, you'll know Danny J. Lewis, kind of a big friend of Point Blank and, you know, worked with us for many, many years. He's actually doing an amazing bit of work for charity, creating 60 beats in 60 minutes, which I'm sure you'll agree is a massive feat. And it's for a really worthwhile cause for Great Ormond Street. So head over to the blog to see a bit more about that. Danny's put together a bit of an intro video, you know, so you can see exactly what to expect. But yeah, definitely get involved, make a donation, and make sure you watch Danny, you know, try his best.
Cool. Yeah, no, really looking forward to that.
Also, it's worth noting that the EMC2 course is due to launch any day now. I think the first one's going to be in April, I think. And there's a video on the website, a disclosure track with Aluna George that Ski has dissected and given you a bit of an insight what you can expect from EMC. Definitely one of the most popular courses we've ever had at Point Blank.
Yeah.
And EMC2 looks to be even better. So definitely check that out. All the info again is on the blog.
Yeah, the deconstruction I think works really well.
Yeah,
it's a great track, and obviously Aluna was.
Yeah, Aluna George, ex-students, Point Blank. It's a wicked track and it's really kind of contemporary and you know, I think that's the amazing thing about Ski and about EMC is how up-to-date the content is. It's incredible. Finally, for you guys watching that are already Point Blank students, it's definitely worth checking out some of the internship opportunities that have recently come up. If you're not a Point Blank student, then you know, unfortunately you need to sign up in order to get access. But for those of you guys that are studying with us, definitely head over to the blog. There's a couple of internships, one with Quietus, and there's a couple of others with Creative Access Platform, Harlequin as well, and One Media. So they're all paid internships, really amazing opportunity to kind of get on that first step, you know, to a career in the industry. So well worth checking out. And yeah, I mean, apart from that, there's a couple of other masterclasses going on. Also, keep locked to the Facebook. And if you do have questions, as we've said, get involved. I'll just have a quick look at the forum at the moment. We've got a couple of guys locking in. But maybe JC, do you want to have a quick look at Logic?
Yeah.
Let's dive into
Cool.
it.
So so this week we didn't really prep anything. I mean, I think we've done a lot. I've done a lot of quite a fair bit of mixing and mastering over the last few sessions that I've done, and covered pretty much all the basics that I wanted to introduce. And this week I thought I'll open a project which maybe goes slightly against everything I've taught so far. But because as much as I go on about how you should organize your mixing sessions, how you should bus things, and how you should do certain things, and not putting too much plugins, etc., etc. I think it's fair to say that a lot of modern producers, because they're not coming from that maybe sound engineer background.
I guess the studio background.
The studio background, because you were limited by hardware. And I think it's one of the reasons that we end up working that way. I find very good reason to explain why you should only do that and do that, and don't do certain things, And I do believe in them. I'm not going to go against what I say, definitely. Because I think it's simpler, and mix can be. I think what I'm trying to put across is that mix can be a lot more simpler than maybe people anticipate or expect it to be.
You get a little bit intimidated by it.
Yeah, and I think the whole key, and it's one thing that we put in the mastering course and in the mixing course, is that ultimately the quality, the final quality of the production starts from the writing, the choice of the kick drum, the choice of the snare, how the bass works together, the arrangement, how much layer, how much space obviously the writing. You can have a really not really exciting track well mixed. It's still not going to be exciting.
No,
whereas you can be really exciting track and you get away with mixes.
And we do hear that. We've gone through examples.
You know what I mean? Exactly. For me, it's at the end of the day, it's about music, and it's about connecting with the music. It's more important than everything else. Up to us, I think. I think people are, because of technology now being available to everyone. Maybe the focus has moved a little bit towards technology, and maybe we're losing a little bit the essential, which is about the music.
That's what we talked about, EMC coming through. Maybe that's an element of that. People are able to make beats and learn about synthesis and stuff, but music and the kind of creative aspect is something that's a bit harder to get across.
To get across, whereas in the old days, you couldn't have access to a big studio. And even when I started, I made a couple of records first as an artist, kind of. I went to a studio to put the vocals down, and I wasn't hardly, I didn't understand what was going on. The engineer does his stuff, but the focus was always you write the song at home, and that would be the part. As an artist, that would be your focus. You make the music, and then everything else will be dealt with by other technicians. Whereas nowadays, now I feel that the focus, because the technology is there now for us to do. We've got all those amazing tools. The focus has slightly moved towards the technical aspect. And I know some producers or students also that they're only starting and they're already wondering about technical aspect of the mastering, which is very much at the very end. And I think it's important to maybe sometimes reinforce that. Forget about the kick drums, forget about what samples you're using, where they're coming from, what processing you put on it. Focus on the writing. Because once you've got a wicked track, you still can't go back and change the kick. You can start producing it again. But I think because writing and producing and mixing becomes all in one, and like Shadow Child was saying, he's mixing very much as he goes along. And it really works, because I think when you've got experience, like a lot of the producers, successful producers have, it's completely valid to do everything in one, and you move forward. And I do the same, when I write and produce, it's mixed at the same time.
I tend to do that. It's kind of hard to move on without it sounding good.
Yeah, absolutely, because you need to move forward. But sometimes I think you've got to be careful that the technical aspect is not going to take over, and make sure the idea is strong.
And then you've just got an amazing 16-bar loop that sounds incredible but doesn't go anywhere.
Exactly, So I think that's one thing that, since we're discussing a bit more production, mixing all those together and all in one, that's something that I quite feel strongly about, and I wanted to.
And I guess as well, do you think, personally, obviously you've kind of come from the old school right up to doing it today in the box. Do you think the way technology is now, it's easier to break those rules, and kind of think differently about the way you work? Like you said, this project kind of goes against.
It is. Yes. I think it is, because when you used to work with analog or even any piece of hardware, even nowadays, you could be in a big studio with a big SSL or Nick desk, whatever. Doing things with hardware takes longer. Just by the nature, you need to plug it, you need to try it out. I mean, it's all right if you've got the budget, and nowadays the reality is the budget, even for big names, producers, it's becoming more and more kind of like, well, you've got 2 days in the studio, the rest of it you do in your home studios. That's the reality.
On your laptop.
On your laptop. So experimenting in a studio is a luxury that I think has gone out of the window. But the nature of the plugins, the way you can bring them in, copy across, blah, 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 routing, everything is so quick that I think experimenting and breaking rules is a lot easier than it's ever been. And I think we hear it in modern production. I mean, Shadow Child, for example, mentioned the kind of new sound he's doing, and that I was quite interested by.
Definitely.
That's something I was kind of like, yes, I really like where it's moving, that kind of electronic
and him kind of just breaking out of something else.
And the guy at Dirty Birds and Eat Everything, I really like that new sound, and we're moving a little bit. I think like electronic music, dance music is starting to move a little bit from, although we've gone through a 90s revival, but I think we're back, suddenly we're moving again, and the modern production is a real break from what we used to do, I think. The rules are changing, even musically. Not only about sound and production, but musically, it's slightly less the conventional chord sequence. And
I mean, a good example is Disclosure, like we talked about. I think their tracks seem to be really musical, but not the kind of, they're kind of almost different.
Totally.
And the production is so clean.
Totally.
It's
Yeah. It seems like something back about, there's a funkiness now that is back, but in an interesting way. In a kind of really broken down and glitchy, and a lot of the influence are kind of coming together, I find, in an interesting way.
I think that's it as well. I think, for me and for other guys out there, I think, with, the way the internet is and the way kind of you can find out about anything instantly, it's a lot easier to cross genres and to learn. Like those guys, I think, are 18 or something, and they're making music that sounds like a combination of old school, garage, US house, all these sounds.
And keeping it fresh, basically. Cool.
We've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Bad Wizardry has asked what happened to the River Star Masterclass. Actually, that one is scheduled for next month, I think, February. I think we're looking at the 8th. I'll have to confirm that. But again, I'm pretty sure River's the next one after Kate Simcoe next week. So keep locked to the blog. And I think we should have all the details for the River Star class up really soon. It should be a wicked one. I'm really looking forward to that one. I think there was a little delay because he was on tour in Asia, I think. Let's have a look. Oh, compliments on the T-shirt. Thank you, Joseph. Will has asked, how long does it take to make a good tune? Long enough so it doesn't sound too basic, or short enough so it doesn't sound too processed? Well, I mean, that's a pretty open-ended question. To be honest, Will, I know that there are some producers who can knock out a track, in a day. There are some producers it can take weeks. For me, it can take months and months.
I think for me, the most experienced, the people that I've noticed mixing, producers like Shadow Child again, I'm referring to him because it was, it's still fresh in my mind. It was last week. They're pretty much right in a day, and the writing happens in 2 hours. I've often also, it's the same.
Get an idea down, get an arrangement.
For music to be exciting and fresh, I think it's something that you do quite. If you think about it too much, somehow the end product sounds a bit like that. It has lost its freshness, its excitement. I think it's the same on mix. A lot of the great mix engineers mix in 6 hours.
And you have a break after that anyway.
You just mix. That's it. That's your mix. And if it's not good, you start from scratch again. Instead of, I remember when I started mixing, I could spend 12 hours an hour and a half on the mix. And it sounded a bit sterile and a bit clean and maybe over-analyzed. And in terms of writing, it's the same with songs. A lot of the people I talk to and producers and songwriters I've worked with over the years, they write a song in 2 hours. Most pop songs are written in 2 hours. You could argue that maybe that's why they're what they are, but let's not go there.
I think that there is something to be said for like hitting an idea and rolling with it.
Absolutely.
Really smashing it out. There's we went and did a kind of production session at a producer's studio down the road, solo, and he said that when he gets something going, he doesn't worry about the mix because he just wants to get the idea straight down.
Exactly.
And he'll get a sketch of a track done in 2 hours. And at that point he might have a break. then he'll come and listen to it, you know, and then tweak. You know, if the
tweak
kick drum's not right, change it. But he just
exactly
uses any old kick drum for now and just
exactly, and that's going back to what the point I was making earlier. You know, I think that I've made that mistake as well, is especially with big computers. You know, I started with a floppy disk where I had maybe 10 kick drums. So the dilemma would be pretty simple. I would have for live drums 909 hip hop. That would be that, and you make it work and you tweak it. But nowadays,
sample libraries
are so huge. The last thing you want to do is spend 2 hours. If you spend literally more than even 10 minutes looking for a kick drum sound, there's no way you're going to put an ID down. Because it's not the right.
Sap your creativity.
It's not. You're not in the right frame of mind. You know, it's about get the music down. You can go back to all of that later.
Yeah, I think there's even something to be said for having like just a go-to. You know, in Ultrabeat, for example, I have like a go-to kit that I just fire up to get a beat down, any old beat, you know, and just kind of get an idea going. Because it's so much easier to work from that than as you say, going through, you know, 20 kick drums or, you know, 100 kick drums.
Yes, and still, you know, with that paranoia of thinking, you know, towards the mix, you still, even just before mastering, you may be like, maybe I should change my kick drums again.
With all the processing on there as well.
You know, so yeah.
Cool.
Are there any questions?
Yeah,
I think otherwise I can start looking at this project.
See what we've got. Someone's asked, do you think it's better to focus more on the production than on the mixing and mastering part?
Yes.
Yeah,
production.
I would say.
I mean, extremely well produced track, which means for me involves great arrangement and choice of sound and the way it's layered, how the dynamic. If it's really well produced, like really top, you actually have very little to do at the mix. I guess especially with electronic music, you know, where all the dynamic is controlled pretty much by the programming, velocities, blah blah. You only use like compressors on electronic music. It's more to shape a sound. But if the sound is really great to start with, you may not want to shape it any further. You know what I mean? So yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I would definitely.
If anything, I would aim to, for me, the best way to work, and that's the way, it's something I've learned with analog and working with bands. And there's a great engineer, producer called Bob Clermontaine in the 80s. He's done all the big bands, Bruce Springsteen's, you know, all the really big guys. He was the mix engineer. And I remember once I received a multi-track from him because we had to copy it. Just a boring job of copying it. And I was still curious because of the name, you know, of the guy. I've put all the faders on 0, nothing, and then I put the DAT to compare. And I was scared how close all the faders on 0 were sounding to the mix. That it was that well recorded.
So you didn't even have to worry about mixing it at all.
It's scary. I was like, that was one of the revelation of my life, you know. And I was kind of like, this is why this guy is paid probably $5,000 to mix a track. You know, there's a reason behind it. So yeah, for me, it's really when you work and produce, you should aim to have all your faders on 0 almost, or just balance it. But don't do, if you can, don't do any EQ and make it sound already good and coherent by just choosing the sound, shaping them in your synth or in your drum machine, or you know, changing the attack, the envelope with the filters. If you can shape that and get it really quite good, then your mix is going to come together so much better and easier. And I think that's a good sign of good production.
Definitely. Really. Let's have a quick look.
And same for the mastering. You know, the aim of a mastering is originally mastering was only to transfer, to put it onto a vinyl, because we didn't have a vinyl in the recording studio. You know, and I think too much emphasis is made on how much you can improve. No, I mean, as a mix engineer, you should take pride in delivering a mix which doesn't need to be mastered almost. Maybe boosting the levels, because nowadays we want level. But that's kind of like how I see it, you know. You should do as little as possible at the mix and mastering if it's amazing to start with.
Yeah, sometimes I guess you've got to just realise it's good enough. You know, and just step away from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got another question. Let's have a look. From Carlos, who's asked about the... Oh, it's gone now. Wait 1 second. The pros and cons of recording at 24-bit versus 16-bit. It's
down to dynamic range. I mean, I could go into a little bit of theory. We talk a lot in quite a depth in the mastering course.
Okay.
I'm going on about it quite a lot more. But basically, it's about dynamic range. So,
which we've had a look at quite a bit the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, but talking with music, you know, but I mean, the processing at 24 bits, you should, depending on what type of music, if you make electronic music only for CDs, some people could argue that 16-bit is enough. But 24, basically, 16-bit gives you a dynamic range. So basically from the lowest level here, from your lowest level here to 0 dBF, which is dB full scale, you've got 96 dB dynamic range. You've got that's 96 dB. Our ears is capable of hearing more than that. So the CD is a bit limited, although most hi-fi system or most system that you use to listen to music are not really good quality. Digital to analog converters can go bigger than that, than those 96 dB. But kind of average quality one, iPod, etc., don't really cope anyway. So what it means between 16 and 24 bits is that the very low level, like the very low, extremely low level, are going to be better represented.
Okay. Right.
That's all. That's kind of it, to simplify it. You know, it's about bit depth. And an analog sound is a curve, is a smooth curve, like a sine wave. You've probably, all of you guys have seen a sine wave.
Sure.
Once you go into digital, it's sampled. And the sample rate is the number of slice. So 44.1 per second, or you can go higher than that. And the bit depth, 1624, is the amplitude. So the more steps you have from bottom to high in terms of the volume, the better resolution and representation you're getting for your volume. What you need to understand, some people make the confusion that 24-bit is you can get louder. No, it's got nothing to do with that, because the loudest is 0 dB. You can't go louder than that. But it has to do with the quality of the very low level that will have more steps to be represented. Typically, jazz, classical music, you want 24-bit to really get the subtleties and stuff. But even dance music, I hear the difference, because when you work through all those processes, you've got to understand that as soon as you move a fader by 0.1, a digital file is made of 0 and 1s. As soon as you touch that by 0.1, it changes the 0 and the 1s. That means you're affecting the quality a little bit. So with the higher bit depth, 24 bits, you're getting a better result.
Okay,
That's
cool.
Kind of
I hope that answers your
and
question,
at all
Carlos.
time, work at 24 bits, you know. The hard drives are big enough now, so we're not short of space. So I hope it answers the question in
I think that does.
a simple enough way.
Okay, cool. We've got a question from Sugar Puppies, which is a wicked name. Hello from New York. Hello. He's asked, how do you compare how do you compare mastering with plugins versus external hardware? Do you get, what are the results? Are they similar, or?
I think every professional mastering engineer are going to tell you that most of them, although I know some that, first of all, you've got two types of hardware, digital and analog. So you could already start questioning that. I think the big difference is not so much the hardware, but it's also everything. What we need to understand is that in a mastering studio, you've got a room which is completely designed. You've got speakers that are between 15 to 25K. £1,000.
Not the Rocket 5.
You know what I mean? That gives you a full range. The cables is important. You've got amazing converters. You've got amazing hardware. So it's not only the hardware that gives you a better result. It's this whole thing that gives you a better sound. You know, and obviously beyond that, you've got the person who's using it, which is probably more important than anything else. You know, in my opinion. So I think hardware, the reality is that, I think analog, I'm a fan of analog, so I'm always going to say, I have a lot of experience as a mix engineer using analog, not as a mastering engineer. A mastering engineer, I've been doing that for now about 3 years, and mostly with plugin. I've learned with plugin. I've done a lot of mastering session as a producer, sitting next to the mastering guy who would use analog, you know. But back in those days, I wasn't really paying attention too much to the technical aspect, more to kind of did I like what it had become, if you like. I think analog. analog gives you a little bit. It's about the harmonic distortion. Those harmonics that is created by analog.
Yeah.
EQs have a bit of character. That's
The
why
funny
you tend to
little,
use them.
little mistakes and stuff that you can't
A
quite,
little bit, but it's the audio curve because of the inherent design behind the machine itself. The inside. It's a lot of people agree that it's more musical. But I think software is catching up very quickly now. And the difference is becoming less noticeable if used in the good hands. And I think I've noticed lately that I've done 2 mastering sessions for mixes I've done and mastered by a mastering engineer. And I was surprised how they're starting to use hardware themselves, the software, occasionally for specific tasks. They're still going to have analog hardware to give that this quality, which is really hard to define. I find, for me, boosting with an analog EQ, for example, is a bit more pleasant than a digital plugin. Although there are some digital plugins that are becoming a little bit trying to emulate that aspect, a bit rounder, a bit nicer. That's how I could define it, I suppose. It's a bit like VHS. It had its imperfection, but even when the tape was properly fucked, you would still see the image. Whereas nowadays a digital picture, it's either brilliant quality, or if it becomes pixelated, you can't see it anymore. It's the same with the vinyl. Even a fucked up vinyl, you would have all the cry code, but you still hear the music through.
And there's something about that, isn't there?
Yeah,
you just kind of drawn
that
to
it's still kind of pleasant somehow. It's still not.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got a glitchy, corrupted digital file,
it's unlistenable.
You can't listen to it. I mean, I don't think we can compare, obviously.
No.
Hardware
and you
versus
could sit
software
here all day as well.
and talk about it, But it's imperceptible. I think. It's more something that you feel. I think to really notice the difference, you have to have a lot of ear training. You've had to really train your ears and be able to hear those differences. And it also depends on the music. If I have a rock band, I think the analog gear hardware is going to sound better on live instrument. It's just the nature of it. I've seen also. Last time I did a mix in a big studio, it was a dance track, and funnily enough, it was a Neve. Not an SSL, but a Neve board, and we ended up mixing in the box because we felt it was working better.
Okay.
Because it was a track a bit like that, quite glitchy, electronic, in your face, and the Neve was almost too nice and making it a bit too pleasant.
Much of a contradiction.
It became a bit too pleasant.
That's interesting.
We had lost a little bit of the punch, and I've heard mastering engineers say that occasionally. On some tracks. So I think more modern production, there's a place for software. It kind of goes together somehow.
I guess that what springs to mind is that kind of tear out dubstep stuff. I'm sure that doesn't really need a kind of warmth to it. It's not that type of...
No, and you may lose actually.
You
may lose. I mean, I remember when we still had the budget. I used to do a lot of hip hop in France, for example, and I would always put stuff to half-inch tape, and that at the same time. We wouldn't always use the tape. Often we would use the tape, but there were some mixes where we felt the digital version was working better somehow.
That's really
so
interesting,
it's
isn't it? So there's a good answer for you there. Hopefully that helps.
I hope given you
Jorge, I think so. Jorge has asked any recommendations for workflow in Logic using Ultra Beat or using different audio tracks with samples on each one of them. I mean, for me, that would depend on the samples in question, really. Ultra Beat, I think, is a wicked drum machine.
I think Ultra Beat is underrated.
Yeah, me too. We had a really good session with Alex Funzi. We did a whole Friday forum on Ultra Beat. Loads of amazing tips in there, stuff that I definitely didn't know. Sculpting stuff within.
Sculpting stuff, the way that you can, the fact that you can mix samples. And synthesis generated sounds together,
that's right,
give you interesting texture, and it takes. What I love about Logic and the external plugin, it's the fact that it takes so little CPU as well. So
and it sounds good.
And it sounds good. It sounds good, and the workflow is. I think working with MIDI is quicker. But working with audio. there's something about working with audio which makes it more permanent, and both are valid.
Yeah.
It's at the end of the day, I think a lot of people always come to us, to tutors, asking what's the best way to win. Sometimes it's difficult to say what's the best way to. I think sometimes it's about what works best for you.
Yeah.
And
at that time, I think it's worth having a look at both, really.
There may be a project where, I think if you can mix up as well, maybe that allows you to change your sound a little bit.
Yeah. And you might find some quirky little, thing that adds to the track.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So it's a bit of a kind of in middle of the road answer, Jorge. But yeah, have an experiment with both, and don't underestimate Ultrabeat. It's a fantastic plugin, really good. RJ has asked, how do you feel about mixing in mono?
I would check my mixes in mono all the time. I think I've talked about it quite a few times last week for all those regions. Mixing in mono is harder because you've got less separation. Mixing in stereo, you've got a sound that is posing problem, that doesn't gel together, conflict with the sound, put it on the side straight away. You've kind of dealt with the problem in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I've never checked in mono, to be fair.
But I do, because again, it's an old school technique, but I've said many times, I think it's still valid, because if it sounds good in mono, it's likely it's going to sound wicked in stereo.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just that it's harder because you don't have that kind of space. You have to make work everything. So in terms of separation, it's harder. I can't see the point to mix in mono just for the sake of it. I think
good reference though.
But you need to reference in mono because of club. Which
we definitely talked about.
We talked about a few times.
Yeah, so there you go. Definitely worth checking your mixes. Especially if you're making kind of big club music. Marcus has asked about the EMC course, about which DAW do you need for it. The EMC course is Ableton and Logic compatible, so you can study with either platform. The way the course works is that all the projects, everything will be available in both, and you can submit your work, to the tutor in Logic or Ableton. So it's pretty flexible, that one. And yeah, if you want to find out a bit more about it, just head over to the course page at Point Blank Online. And in the FAQ section, you should see a recommendation of equipment, software and hardware and everything like that. Okay, Felipe has asked, he said he's thinking about applying to one of your courses, but since I'm not from the UK, what's your advice to survive in London? Because I would need to eat, get a house and pay for the course. Felipe, I mean, London can be an expensive place, but there's lots out there. Lots of the guys that come and study here from Portugal, from Europe, from further afield as well. So
share a flat.
Share a flat, yeah.
There's
lots of good accommodation stuff on our website as well. And the UKBA is quite a good place to check about being an international student coming over. But yeah, there's always stuff out there, bar work, waitering, and sharing a flat. Gumtree is always good for finding flat shares and stuff like that. Okay, let's have a quick look. Eternal Mist has said, what do people mean when they say you need 3 dB headroom on your tracks? And also, what's the best way of metering?
3 dB headroom, people mean about the master fader. It's about we've got this question a lot about how do you deliver your master for mastering. So I could illustrate that a little bit, so at least I don't have Logic open for nothing. Let me play this track. Let's take a part that is a bit louder. So you see here, obviously it's, have we got the mixer up? Yeah. So we're picking by 5 dB, so obviously it goes in the red, it's a no-go. What we mean by 3 dB headroom is basically having 3 dB free between 0 dB. So basically peaking maximum, that the peaks should be at -0.03.
And that's the max across the whole
That's kind of what it means. Now, the reality because what's going to happen in mastering is as soon as you give me a track, let's say if at you've put it at 0 dB, I'm bringing it into Logic or Pro Tools, or I'm boosting, let's say it needs more bass, I'm boosting, let's say 60 hertz, straight away going over the red.
Yeah.
So that's the initial reason why.
So you're giving the engineer a little bit of room to work with.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
That's kind of what it is, essentially. In the digital world, maybe working in the box is slightly less relevant, because if you give me a track that is on -1, I probably will turn it down at -3 or 4 anyway, to give myself this headroom.
Yeah.
The purists could argue that by doing that, I'm already changing the quality of the sound, because it's all about doing as little as possible,
Right,
blah, 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 blah. But that's basically what it is. So a mix at 3 dB should be something like, you see this one is peaking now at -2.5. This one now is about -3.4, so that would be kind of okay. I mean, as you can notice here, the reason I've opened that mix, and depending on how many questions we're getting, maybe I'll be able to address them, is that everything is so heavily limited on every single channel. And that's kind of the reason I wanted to bring up that mix. Like I was saying, it has a massive collection of, look at that, compressor, limiter, chorus, gain, low cut, it's spread, limiter again, multi-compressor, limiter. This one's got like compression, overdrive, multipressor, limiter. Everything I wouldn't do.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a lot of processing.
And still it sounds, it has the attitude, and it sounds,
It does the job of what it's meant to sound.
It sounds like it's supposed to sound. And I remember for the mixing dance music with Logic that we've done with Danny J, that was one of the tracks that I started to work on, and I did a mix which is more a traditional mix like I would approach it, and to be fair, I don't think that it was, although I didn't spend much time on it, about an hour, but I don't think it was sounding as good as the original.
Okay.
It had a vibe, the fact that it has all this stuff, it kind of works. And it's typically somebody who's mixed it as he went along during the production and the writing process.
I guess so. You can see that.
So for all the good advice, and that's kind of like, I really wanted to give that kind of perspective. For all the good advice that I believe I've tried to put forward, and I've been taught and I'm trying to teach, there's also a case for go completely against it, and if it sounds good, ultimately, if the track is exciting and everybody's dancing in a club, if it's in a club or or is being played on the radio 10 times a day, you must have done something right.
Yeah, I think that is the ultimate role at the end of the day, isn't it? If it sounds good, do it. Yeah. I guess it's also nice to think about the fact that you're not completely governed by rules. If it sounds good, go for it. Cool. We've got another question. Do you think, because of the technical possibilities nowadays, that the music industry will move into an industry of many small artists than an industry of just a few big names like it was? Well, I guess that's kind of the case. There are a lot of labels.
It is the case. You could argue that it was always the case.
Yeah.
If you go back into the 70s, even rare jazz, funk stuff that we're not aware of. There's a great documentary about a guy called Rodriguez, who's apparently released he's more of a singer-songwriter in the 70s, and everybody believed that he killed himself because he wasn't success. He didn't have any recognitions. Only to find out several years later that he was actually multi-platinum in South Africa and Australia.
Wow. Really?
And now they found him eventually, and now he's touring those countries.
Amazing.
And he's
so no recognition at home.
And no record. Well, actually, now it's starting at home, finally. It's a bit like Anvil, this documentary. I really love those kind of stories. And yes, I think overall, you've got more opportunities. You can be an artist, put it out there. Before that, you couldn't do that. You had to go through a label, no matter how big it was. Maybe a small label, but you still had that process. That means that meant that you had to record, you couldn't have a studio at home, so all those implications, there was a cost involved. So yes, I believe it will turn into that.
I think it's happening a lot. You see lots of guys kind of they might put out an album for free, you know, self-release it on the internet, and then from there,
be able to build,
yeah.
absolutely. They may be able to get a sync.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
Apple may pick it up for their next iPad advertising
yeah.
or what else. You know, what I think it's interesting to see, for example, the world of advertisement now. They all try to get quirky, independent artists. You know, all that kind of, kind of stuff. Probably because they pay less money for it for stuff. But also,
and it's something different, I guess. You know, it's not library music. It stands out. It's kind of inventive, creative.
Exactly. It's authentic rather than being library music as it used to be, which was usually a bad pastiche of the real thing. Now things have changed. So yes, in that sense, the industry is changing with many more smaller artists, and I think the income will be the same. You won't have a big income coming from your record sales, but you'd get smaller incomes coming from a lot of different platforms. I know a lot of people are talking about Spotify and the fact that it's a bad deal, etc., etc. I have to disagree a little bit. I think Spotify is absolutely amazing is quite essential to make that change, in my opinion. Let's not forget.
It has to happen, doesn't it?
It has to happen. I think it's great that it's a stream. The fact that it's a stream can't be as expensive as if you were buying a product.
Yeah, of course not.
So, I think the 200 stream is about the equivalent of a download. It seems about right, because you're going to get more streams than you would buy, So it works out okay. I think we are at the beginning, then finally the record company are soon embrace the digital revolution, and everybody's going to be on board and try to make it work. I'm still, for me, I'm quite surprised, for example, that a lot of independent refuse to go on Spotify because of this issue of bad pay, under the excuse of they don't want to sell out their artists for so little money and all that kind of shit. I think it's kind of, in my opinion, it's a massive mistake. I think it's a necessary change. I think the record company seems to, it's looking more and more like in 2-3 years' time, YouTube would be one of the biggest income for artists. Because the whole thing is changing the way you can monetize. And
it's kind of the only way people watch music now, isn't it?
So,
go to
yeah,
YouTube.
exactly. So I think what has happened is there's been all this piracy thing and digital revolution, and record company ignored it because they were making so much money on CDs. That's the thing, is that we are back at we're almost back in the 70s. I think in the 70s there wasn't as much money made as in the 80s. The CD suddenly took it to another level, and suddenly when everybody realized, oh, we don't sell CD anymore, the income drops. But you've got to put it into perspective. I think CDs were too expensive, they were cheap to make, and the profit made on those was so massive that inevitably suddenly when the reality sank to labels that we're not going to.
You can't make this kind of money forever.
But I'm really optimistic about where the music industry is going. Maybe I was less so 5 years ago, but I'm certainly am now. But yes, there will be smaller income coming from more places. As an artist nowadays, you need to be diversified a lot more.
That's right.
You can't only rely on sales and gigs. You've got to look into other ways, and it's an exciting time.
I think so.
It's an exciting time.
There's lots of guys at Point Blank starting their own labels and getting tracks out there, and I think it's wide open, to take advantage of. So it's definitely exciting time.
I mean, I agree also that the problem with that is maybe you need to go through a lot of not so good music to find the good stuff.
That's true.
I'm struggling to where do I start? There are evenings where I'm kind of like, shit, I want to discover some stuff. Where do you start? It's a bit overwhelming.
It is. Definitely.
But you could argue that it's always been the same. Maybe. I don't know. For me, it's an exciting time. But yes, I would agree with that. It's more with less coming in, but more, basically.
Yeah. Cool. Here's a question for you. I'm not sure. Bad Wizardry's asked if you can knock up a skippy garage deep house beat in Ultra Beat.
No,
probably not.
Just because it's not really my style.
I think there's definitely a couple of sessions where we've done that though. We've had ones with Danny J. Lewis, Alex Funzi.
I could do one, but it's probably would be not really skippy or garagey or deep. which would defeat the purpose.
Just a pounding kick drum. Yeah, so definitely check through some of the older sessions. We'll be easily able to find you one.
Sorry.
Yeah, maybe I'll go through and I'll post one up for you. I should be able to do it after this anyway. So I'll find one from Danny J. It's going to be the best. Cool. We've got a question. Groove Salvations asks, how do you do the hearing test of your mix? You make the volume low or medium?
According to the Fletcher-Munson curve, our ears are the most neutral at 83 dB.
Right.
That's normally what you should be listening at. You can have a little app on your telephones or iPhone,
right.
which tell you dBSPL, which is the sound pressure level coming from your speakers, because we've got a natural dip. I think the key, especially when mastering, is to have a constant level. Because yes, if you start changing your levels all the time, then the way you hear the frequency is going to change. At certain level, the bass is going to seem louder and vice versa. So be consistent, and 83 dB is allegedly the reference, where our frequency response, the way we hear frequencies, is the most neutral. There's still a massive dip between 1 to 5K, because those are the frequency we hear the most. It's because I think human has developed these frequencies to be able to hear each other.
Right, okay.
So it belongs to the range where the voice is. Very natural, kind of the way animals evolve. So we are animals, and we've evolved the same way. But I mean, the key for me is have a consistent 83 dB in a small room. Like if I'm here and so close to the speaker, 83 dB is probably going to be too loud. Whereas if, let's say, the speakers were at the end of the room, then it may be the right level. But what's important is that to critically analyze your mix is compare to some mixes that you really like, that you think that's the way I want my mix to sound, in sense of the frequency, the amount of bass, the top end, and work on that level and keep on comparing and adjust your mix at the same level.
Keep the level, consistent.
And it's extremely important that when you, I often still do that, have a mix as a reference at the bottom of my arrangement in Logic, on the last track. If it's a mastered one, inevitably it's going to sound louder. So I'm going to adjust it. Usually you're going to need to turn it down by 6 to 8 dBs to make it the same level. And because the only way you can compare is at the same level. Because otherwise, naturally, what is louder is going to seem to sound better. But like we've talked about it already many times. It's a trick that your ears is playing on you.
Cool. So I think that's some good advice there, definitely. Let's have another quick flick through here. Someone's asked, Subliminal Session has asked, which drum machines would you recommend in Ableton 8? I think the drum rack,
drum rack seems to be great.
Really wicked, really good.
I think it's easy to use. I mean, I'm only learning Ableton. With the 9 beta at the moment, and I'm really just literally total beginner. But rack seems to be drum rack. Really nice, good. Easy to use.
I think that's the main thing about that. Really it's cool. Definitely the ease of use. Evans asked, where can he hear some of your music, JC?
I think I've got stuff on Discog where you can see stuff that I've produced or
JC Concato, check it out.
I've got stuff there.
I'm sure if you do a Google search, you can find
there'll be some stuff out there.
Cool.
Not that I'm proud of, but
we've got kind of running out of time at the moment, so we'll just try and flick through a couple more questions. We've got a question. CJRMX has asked, do you believe that nice sounding mixes can be produced on multimedia speakers like really kind of budget, low level speakers, or is getting kind of pro monitors going to be? I think it's got pretty important, for me.
For me, the speakers is probably the most important of anything else. I'd rather have a very simple a really basic sequencer limited to 8 tracks, and you make it work musically with what you have, but trusting what you can hear and how it's going to translate out there is probably the most important part.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just going to have a kind of a distorted view of what you're listening to. It's never going to sound right.
Having said that, it's always hard to predict. I remember once I was working on the demo, and I didn't even mix it. It was literally we were writing with a friend. He had shitty hi-fi speakers, so we were not even thinking about sound. We were writing, and like you do, following day went to a big mixing room, and I was with the guy who mixed Blur and all those guys. So
Right.
quite a bit of an experienced mix engineer. I just played him. He was kind of like, "Oh yeah, you've worked on a track." He was kind of like, "Shit, the mix is perfect,"
Really?
and it wasn't like I even tried. You know, it
Yeah,
just
yeah,
happened
yeah.
that those speakers must have been translating well.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
hard to. It's kind of hard to predict sometimes, but it's basically. It's hard to, I mean, I've been in a scenario where you mix on the most expensive speakers. It's about how you get on with them, how you understand how they translate, how they should sound. You know, I could have the 20 grand speakers that I don't understand and never worked with before and make a mix that sounds a mess when I take it out there.
Yeah.
Whereas I could have some really shitty 50 quid speaker that I know so well inside out that actually I know how they translate outside. So there is this element.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd say, you know, there's lots of kind of mid-range. I mean, even kind of budget, but you know, studio speakers. Even if they're cheap and you know them well,
Yes.
you know that works.
Totally.
Definitely.
You know,
Definitely.
I mean, I know that Ben Metcalf, Rogue Element,
Yeah.
still works with M1 Elysis.
Yeah.
And he said, look, it works for me.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's in a room, untreated, and it works.
Yeah. Cool.
We're really going against everything we've
Yeah.
always recommend.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think it's really important to give a bit of perspective
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, I think that's probably about time, guys. But we will try and run through the comments. So, you know, if you do come up with any other questions, post them up there, and we will try and run through them. If not today, then you know, first thing next week, really. And you know, we be sure to lock in next Friday. I think is it Danny's in next week?
I think the Danny next Fridays is the Danny's challenge. Yeah.
Danny's challenge. Yeah. So
60 beats, 60 minutes.
yeah, it should be amazing. So definitely tune into that. We're all going to be rooting for him. And, you know, if you wanted to donate, it's an amazing cause for Great Ormond Street. Head over to the blog. You can find out all the information there. In the meantime, Wednesday, as I said before, Kate Simcoe for a live masterclass using Logic and Ableton. So it should be wicked. And keep locked to the Facebook and to the blog. And that's it. So we'll see you soon.
See you soon.